Good evening all and welcome. There are times in life when strange things happen that we cannot explain. Some may call these glitches in the Matrix. Whatever your position on them, they are indeed terrifying and bizarre. Let's hear your take on them, but for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I grew up in the Arctic. In the town I lived in, as long as it was a clear night, it was an extremely normal occurrence to see all sorts of lights move across the sky. Keep in mind the winter is long in the Arctic, which means longer amount of time being spent under the stars. It's quite beautiful, as long as you don't mind the cold so much. Sometimes I would drive a snowmobile a few kilometers out of town, shut it down and just lay down on the snow looking up at the majesty of it all. The only thing disturbing the silence being the occasional breeze. The northern lights are also a common occurrence. It doesn't happen every day, but often enough that they start getting ignored after a while, as long as they aren't too spectacular anyway. On one night in particular, without asking my parents, as it was their snowmobile, I decided to go on one of my midnight drives out of town. I drove a few kilometers over the hills to find a spot devoid of light pollution from town, shut off the machine, and settled into a good spot to look up and be retrospective. It wasn't all that interesting of a scene, a few satellites passing here and there, some relatively boring, actively affecting the magnetic field, and that's when I started noting a clicking noise. At first I thought it was the sound of the snow machine cooling down, as the engine expands and contracts a lot in the cold, but the source of the sound definitely wasn't coming from that direction. My next thought was there must be an animal nearby, in which case I needed to get out of there fast. You don't really want to mess with a wild animal, but the clicking is far too regular for an animal to produce it. It was fairly mechanical sounding, and again the source of the sound wasn't coming from anywhere around me laterally, it was coming from up. So naturally I look up determined to ascertain the origin of this strange noise. I see what I always see: stars, northern lights, and some lazy satellites floating across the sky, all normal stuff. But before I dismiss it altogether and begin heading home, I noticed something strange in the aurora borealis. There were 3 rather strong points of light. I ignored them at first, thinking they were oddly symmetrical stars, but this proved false. They were definitely getting brighter. I kept staring with morbid fascination as they grew stronger and stronger, yet still, only remaining single points in the sky. All the while the clicking noise is getting louder and louder and more pronounced, almost like someone started with tapping a pen on a desk and clacking billiard balls together inside my head. Then it stops, the lights are gone, the clicking is not heard, and aside from being a little stiff, cold, and rather petrified, I'm fine. So I jump back on the snowmobile, thinking perhaps I'm going crazy. The machine takes a little longer to start up than usual, and I am beginning to worry. But soon it's running and I'm heading back to my town. As I'm driving back, several plausible scenarios as to what occurred are running through my head. I'm thinking it could have been a helicopter from the mine or some strange northern light behavior, etc. Probably not that big of a deal. I pull up to my house, lights are all dark, strange. It wasn't like that when I left. I open the outer doors as quietly as possible, remove my winter gear and enter the inner door. The house is quiet, really quiet. My parents are teachers and are usually up late marking or watching TV. All I'm thinking is I have to get to bed without anyone noticing. Proves to be easy as I'm soon under my covers and go set my alarm for the next day. When all of a sudden everything made sense. Engine hard to start, stiff, rather chilly, nobody up when I was gone for what felt like a relatively short period of time. It was almost 11 p.m. when I left, and now it was creeping up to 6 a.m. I stood, staring at clicking lights for almost 7 hours. I never ended up sleeping that night, and I don't go on late-night snow machine rides anymore. This is my dad's story, and he shared it with me when I was about 10 or 11. When he was around 22, he was out of town visiting some friends around 30 miles from where his parents lived. Being the kind of person who was a clean freak, he hated having stubble and a beard of any kind. So he called his parents from his friend's house phone and said he'd be back in around 45 minutes or so and then hung up. Now, he said that the faster route was on a country road that skipped out any major dual carriageways, and after around 20 minutes of driving and around 5 minutes after getting onto this country road, he said he saw an incredibly bright white light and thought it was a broken down car in a side road. He got out of the car and investigated, but the white light promptly got brighter, then vanished. At this point, he was crapping himself, so he jumped back in his car and concentrated on the road ahead, and finally got home. As he got into the driveway of his parents' house, they ran outside to him crying and hugging him as he was getting out of the car. Being incredibly confused, he asked them what happened. They told him that after he called them, they were waiting for him to get home, but he didn't get home that night. Apparently, it had been 3 days since his phone call. After calming down and calming his parents down, he went to his bedroom and glanced at himself in the mirror. As he walked past it, he had a freaking stubbly beard on the go. To this very day, no one knows what happened that night, and his family hate talking about it. It was the early 2000s. It's 3 a.m. and my house phone starts ringing. The phone was on the other side of the room. I stand up on the bed and start heading for the low dresser to answer it, and my wife gets up to get the phone as well. By this time it's at the third ring, and I remember thinking, crap, it's going to go to voicemail. The ringing stops. My cell phone starts ringing, and I immediately change gears to someone really needs to get a hold of me. I grab my phone, and the caller ID is just 0000, lots of them. I answer, hello? And a voice comes through the line, as though it were a distant overseas call, parting through the static and asking, is this Joel? To which I replied, yes, who is this? Immediately, it was as though those words, is this Joel, were being pulled back through the line, echoing in reverse. There was static, and the call dropped. Jump forward several years. I'm installing a phone system, and we're joking around that it's so advanced, it could place calls back in time. I punch in my old phone number and call it, realizing the number is still active and that my wife may answer. I hang up and call my now years old and retired phone number. Someone answers. I freak out and ask, is this Joel? The voice on the other end of the line answers, through space and time, yes, who is this? At that instant, I immediately remember taking that call, and I am struck dumb. I cannot speak without thinking. I reflexively pressed the hang-up button. I'm now freaked out. I look over to my colleague who isn't as freaked out as I am. From his perspective, I called a number and someone had the same number and answered, but he realized that was my voice on the other end of the line. I told him, I got that call. It was 5 years ago, but I got that call. Then we both freak out. I hit redial and get a message that the number is no longer in service. I call my home back and my wife answers. I tell her I'm testing a phone system and ask if she had any previous calls. Nope, none. I'm kind of freaking out, but with her on speakerphone I ask her, hey, do you remember that 3 a.m. call we got all those years back? Yeah? Where I asked, is this Joel, and the line went dead? Yeah? I'm just looking at my colleague with my wife still on speaker. Do you remember what year that was? It was before we had kids, so it would have had to have been around 2002 time frame. I don't know how to say this, but I'm pretty sure it was me that called. I have always loved the outdoors. I was fortunate enough to be born in the Great Pacific Northwest, the Western Washington Cascades to be exact. My father and I spent much of my early years of life exploring the mountains, fishing and hunting. There are parts of the Cascades I know like the back of my hand. One of those places is called Goblin Creek, up the Unexplainable road off Highway 2. When I was a kid, we would drive up there to do some fishing and shooting, but also to collect a specific type of rock that, when cut in half polished, would resemble a scenic picture of the view of the mountains from within a cave. I do not recall the true name of the stone, we just called them picture rocks. My father's friend and neighbour owned an art gallery/mineral shop that used to be a church. If you have ever driven through Startup on your way up from Sultan to Gold Bar on Highway 2, you might remember seeing the robot sculpture outside the shop that my dad built. This is the place that we sold the stone for $2 a pound. It was lucrative revenue for a preteen. The walk from the creek where we harvested these rocks to the dirt road wasn't particularly long, but lengthy enough that you could presumably get lost while en route if one didn't know where to go. In the years we spent at the creek, I had only ever seen two other people out there. One was a game warden that heard the gunshot from our target practicing session and tracked us down to make sure everything was fine. The other is the subject of my curiosity. When I was about 14, I distinctly remember hauling a backpack full of these rocks up from the creek to my dad's truck. Along the way, I ran into a man that looked to be about 30 years old. We both appeared to be surprised, as we would, running into anyone in this rather remote section of the mountains. But as I got closer to this man as he was standing down near the creek and I heading up the road, he seemed to grow increasingly more startled, as if he was seeing a ghost. He didn't say anything as I passed. He just stared at me, seemingly trying to figure out the appropriate words to ask me something. After I passed him, I remember thinking how much this guy looked like he could be in my family. The similarities were striking, and I continued on to the truck, dumped my load of rocks off at the truck and headed back down to the river with my dad. When I arrived, I told him about the encounter and asked him if he had seen this man, to which he replied that he had not. I have remembered this encounter quite vividly since then. Last year, I was visiting my family in Snohomish and decided to visit up Old Goblin Creek for nostalgic purposes. It had been about 15 years since I was last up there. Along the way up, I found out that the Unexplainable road had apparently washed out years before. Luckily, I knew of another way up, via Jack Pass. I found the dirt road and parked where my dad used to park, and proceeded to walk through the woods down to the creek. Along the way, I saw something that shook me to my core. As I was about halfway through the woods, I was startled to see someone else coming up from the creek. A boy, about 14 years old. He was wearing a backpack that looked to be burdened by heavy weights. And as we got closer, I began to get increasingly confused and shocked, as the boy looked exactly like I did at his age. I meant to say something to him as he passed, but could not figure out the right words to express what I was thinking at that moment. He passed me and kept going. I walked a little ways and finally stopped, when it all really hit me. I remember both the encounter from my teenage years and realized I had just lived the other half of that experience. Both the man and the boy were me, roughly 15 years removed. I turned around to catch up to the boy in the thick, western Washington woods. I ran all the way back up the road to where my truck was, to find nothing. There wasn't anyone else there besides the road for him to go down, and I hadn't stalled so long as to not be able to catch him up. He was simply gone. Curiosity got the best of me, so I hurried down to the creek half, expecting to find my dad fishing on the bank, 15 years younger, but found no one. I ended up going home, and decided that this experience was too unbelievable to even tell my friends and family. I just wanted to get this out to this wonderful community, to see what others thought, and hopefully know if anyone has had any kind of experience like this as well. A few weeks ago, my friend's dad told me a pretty bizarre story that scarred me for life. About 15 years ago, my friend's parents, Michael and Julia, were woken up at 1 a.m. by a very loud thud that rattled the house. Worried that one of the kids had fallen out of the bunk bed, Michael went downstairs to check on them, but the kids were sound asleep and safe in their beds. Julia told Michael to check the house in case of intruders, and Michael checked the doors and windows before going to take a look outside. After about 10 minutes of investigating, he found nothing unusual and went back inside to go to bed. He found his wife absolutely worried sick and demanded to know where the hell he'd been and what happened. Confused and tired, Michael told her he found nothing and tried to calm her down, before she pointed out it was now 4 a.m. and that he had been missing for 3 hours. She had even gone outside to check on him, and he was nowhere to be found and didn't respond to her calling his name. Unable to figure out what happened, they returned to bed and slept until Michael had to get up for work a few hours later. Michael owns a painting business, and a few hours after working on this house, he notices his eyes start to feel itchy. Then his eyes start to burn. Then after a few hours his eyes burned so badly he was holding his eyelids open to not blink because it felt like his lids were sandpaper against his eyes. His employees rushed him to hospital, and Michael was treated for second-degree flash burns on his eyes. He was told his burns were the equivalent of staring at welder torches without eye protection for an extended period of time. His eyes were treated, and he was lucky to have his vision fully restored. He is one of the most stand-up guys I know, and the way he told this story gave me the creeps. Dead serious and no explanation for what happened. His wife was there too, and she was visibly upset when he was telling me that story. Where I live, there's a train that goes from my school to my home. The distance between those stations is about 15 minutes. One day my friend and I left school together and boarded the train. We were both getting off at the same stop. Let's just say the station at the train is station 1 and our home is station 5. The distance between each station is about 3 minutes. We boarded at 3 p.m. and chat. I've taken this train more than 100 times before, meaning we know how long it takes, what our stop looks like, etc. Even the train announcer announces the stations as well. We constantly look outside for scenery to tell us it's our stop, and keep checking our watches and the stations we're at. We continue chatting, and then as usual we get off the train. We exit, turn right, and take the escalator down, and it's not there. Confused, we give a quick look around and notice we're not at station 5, we're at station 8. No problem, we just sat past it, right? So we checked our watch. 3:15. Both him and I have never been able to deduce what happened. The time needed to reach station 8 would have been at least 10 more minutes. The train itself is automatic, so the distance and time never need to change. We take the opposite train and discuss what happened. We both saw the last station the train announced was station 4, and was at the scenery we saw a million times over passing by a school we always used as our landmark. Up to this day I can't find a reasonable explanation of what happened, and it still creeps me out to this day. I went camping with my buddy when we were 15 or so. We walked down from his family camper to sneak a cigarette in the field at the front of the campground. While standing there, we saw a light in the sky moving, erratically, in all directions really fast, very slow, and everything in between. Fascinating. We finished our smoke and headed back to the camper. As we walked up, his mother came racing out to us, absolutely irate, frightened. She said they had been looking for us for 3 hours. They had checked the field that we were in, and we weren't there. In our minds, we hadn't been gone more than 15 minutes. We lost 3 hours of our life and never found out how or why, and never got to the bottom of it. Back in 1987, I was sitting in class and had to this day the most intense and vivid daydream I'd ever experienced. I was sitting in class looking at the clock, when the next thing I know I'm walking through the mall with a woman who I've never met before. I was an adult, and I knew she was my girlfriend. As we were walking and talking, some guy started shooting people randomly. Before I had the chance to react, I felt something like a punch to my chest. When I looked down, I was standing over my own body, with a pool of blood spreading around it. I watched the chaos of the scene unfold in real time. My girlfriend was over my body screaming, and I was trying to comfort her. I watched the police neutralize the shooter. Then the other emergency workers cleared the scene. I watched them remove my body. I tried to follow, but I was unable to leave the mall. I lived/haunted the mall for a few years. As a spirit, I was bored, so I would mess with the security guards during the night shift. During the business hours, I would try to interact with the customers. Every now and then I would get someone to nod hello or walk around me so we wouldn't collide. I remember an elderly man sitting on one of the resting benches have a heart attack. As he was standing over his body, I walked over to comfort him. I had an overwhelming feeling that it wasn't his time to die, and told him so. He climbed and sank back into his body as the emergency workers were resuscitating him. One day I was sitting on one of the resting benches as a young boy around the age of 6 or 7 sat down next to me. He started talking to me, and when he did, I felt something weird happen, and I knew I was about to leave with him. I became his invisible friend. His name was Brian, and was the only child of a single mother. She was an abusive alcoholic. I helped him survive life. I taught him not to talk about me, so that they wouldn't think he was crazy. I experienced being with Brian for years. When he was about 10 years old, his mother came home drunk. She went into a drunken tirade and hit Brian. I lost my temper and was able to slam her into the wall. She never hit him again after that. I watched him grow into a teenager, and when he was 18, I knew that my time with him had come to an end. We said our goodbyes, and just like that, the daydream was over. I looked at the clock and maybe a minute had passed. I had experienced just short of 2 decades of existence as a ghost in a minute of time. When I was in high school, I had a habit of taking power naps while everyone was having lunch. I'd curl up in a quiet part of the hallway, put my jacket over my face, and sleep for maybe 15 minutes. This one time I was startled out of sleep by a passing crowd of fellow students. Everyone was in a rush to make it in before our strict teacher would start taking notes of absences. I ran after the crowd, walked up the stairs straight into the right classroom, and sat at the only desk that was left for me. The teacher told us to open our books. Then the world froze, and suddenly the situation sort of reset. I was back in the hallway, blinking sleep out of my eyes because I'd been awoken by passing students. I thought it was a funny coincidence, some sort of brain fart. I went upstairs after the others and sat at the same empty desk. The teacher told us to open our books, and again, reset. The same 2 or so minutes. Woke up to a noise, go upstairs after the others, sit at the same desk. Teacher tells the class to open the books, replayed again. For the first few loops, while it was still more interesting than terrifying, I had so many questions. Was I having an intense nightmare, going insane or something? I was and am an atheist, with zero belief in anything paranormal, so no options other than, this isn't real, didn't cross my mind. Some loops later, I started doing all these things I'd read about online to see if it was a dream. You know, reading signs, trying to put my hand through a wall while looking away, that kind of stuff. Everything seemed as real as reality to me. My theory and contemplation got more outlandish though. If there was some sort of complex temporal situation going on, the loop would continue indefinitely. Would that mean I'd eventually die of hunger? At the same time, I tried to mess around with the loop itself to see if something would happen, deviating from the route, but nothing happened. I tried staying in the hallway or going outside, but after about 2 or so minutes I was always back in the hallway regardless of my actions. I tried to engage other students and teachers, but everyone seemed preoccupied with their own tasks. If I managed to get someone to talk to me, they were always irritated with whatever I did to deviate them from the loop. "You shouldn't skip class, or the teachers are going to be mad if we're late." I get the same default responses and same tones over and over. I even tried to injure myself with scissors, an incredibly ill-advised move, I know, but at this stage I was basically out of my mind with fear. Luckily, it only resulted with the loop ending faster. I honestly didn't know how many repeats of the loop I experienced because as soon as I stopped counting as I was getting more and more scared, I stopped wondering about the inexplicable hows and whys. As far as I could tell, the situation could not be explained, at least not by me, and I was the only variable in the loop. So I became obsessed with the idea that perhaps a certain behavior was required or expected of me. I'd seen the time loop trope in fiction before, but in those scenarios there was usually some sort of event that had to either be prevented or instigated. In my case, there was nothing. My self-imposed goal became to stop acting like I was aware of the loop, so I tried to replicate my behavior from the first loop down to the finest detail to my best recollection, but that changed nothing. But I latched onto the idea of perfecting this routine because I had nothing else. Loop after loop of the same thing, they all blurred together in my memory. When you're scared of a fate potentially worse than death, it's incredibly easy to stop asking questions and just function on autopilot. The thing is, I'd have written the whole thing off as a dream, if not for the very last loop. By then I'd completely accepted my fate of living in some sort of limbo where the loop no longer reset. My teacher told the class to open our books, and when I usually would have woken up in the hallway again, the world hung, I guess. I don't know how else to describe it. Time seemed to pause for less than a second, just like you might experience in a game when you quick save, and then the teacher went on with the lesson of the day, and life resumed. I don't know what to do with this experience, other than share it on the internet, in the hope that someone is amused for a few minutes, or perhaps if they've got answers to what the hell happened that day. I had just been watching a show that was talking about alternate realities and time travel, and it got me thinking about something that happened to me many, many years ago. I'm going to take you back to 1967. We moved into this house in Martinez, California on Adelaide Drive. I had some weird stuff happen at this place that to this day still perplexes me. But I'll try and keep this on the subject of my blue steamer trunk that I found in the tool shed of this residence shortly after we moved in. I say my blue steamer trunk because it literally had my name on it, first and last. It was taped on the top center of the trunk with the raised letters plastic label maker tape. I found it while exploring the property and wandered into the tool shed aside from the main house. I go inside and ask my mum and dad if it's something they had hid from me and would be mine soon, or maybe that belonged to my auntie after whom I was named. They both said no, but suggested it could have belonged to a previous tenant, as we were renting the home. So I let it go for a bit, which was odd for me, because I was quite the inquisitive child and had always sought answers to all the mysteries of life. I had no idea if my name was common or not, as I was simply 10. Sometime later, I got friendly with the landlady who lived just one street over, and asked her if someone with my name had ever lived there, and explained about the trunk that should be returned to the rightful owner. But she went on to say that I was the only person with that name ever to live there, and suggested perhaps my parents were just hiding a gift for perhaps my birthday or Christmas. But I knew better. My parents were not the types to think that far ahead about gifts, and I would most likely be the recipient of a last-minute gift from the grocery store or something from a thrift store or hand-me-down. I tried to put it out of my mind for a while, and it worked. Our dad and my older brother Jack who'd used the shed to store tools and stuff for working on the car, but neither of them ever mentioned seeing this blue streamer trunk that took up a large amount of space for the relatively small shed. I remember that Jack had removed the transmission from his old car and stored it in said shed because of the minimal space. It was practically in the middle of the floor, set next to the trunk that was placed neatly under the workbench. Then one Sunday in late spring, I had a great idea for a slumber party. Remember, this was the time of the hippie protests, and things like sit-ins and even love-ins were all the rage. So I decided to have a bake-in, where me and my chosen list of guests would bring their favorite cookie recipes and bake cookies for fun, entertainment, and of course, the all-important ingredients for a slumber party, snacks. All in all, it went pretty well, although my poor parents had to deal with the loud gaggling of a constant train of young girls trapezing back and forth from the patio and the kitchen and bathroom. Whoever thought to build a 4-bedroom house with only one bathroom never had to deal with a preteen bladder. When it got late, we finished cleaning up the kitchen, though I'm sure the patio was a lot messier. We washed our faces, brushed our teeth, and put our pajamas on, and prepared for lights out at midnight. Of course, we rolled into our sleeping bags and pillows and such to pretend that we were going to sleep. We were so high on sugar that we had no intention of doing just that. We tried to play quietly, but if you can ever find a way to have a pillow fight quietly, I'd like to know how, because we certainly did not succeed. My older sister, who was up and sneaking talking to her boyfriend on the phone, told me that if Mum got up and found her on the phone because of us, that we would regret it for the rest of our lives. As you can imagine, we decided on a quieter game. We got into a circle with me standing in the center as the other girls sat on the floor and were trying to do what is now called light as a feather, stiff as a board. Although I wasn't lying down, I'm not sure what we chanted. It was dark except for the street light. I was watching myself in the reflection from the window and saw myself start to rise. It freaked me out, so I looked down at the other girl to see if they were seeing what was happening. Most of them had their eyes closed and were saying something like "rise" in unison. It was then I noticed that Eleanor Nichols had her eyes open, with her jaw gaping. She and I looked at one another and screamed. I promptly fell the 6 inches or so that I had been raised. Everyone had stopped their chant in fright, and my mum popped through the door and yelled that we'd better shut up and go to bed right now. We tried. Well, some girls made it, but Eleanor and I were still too freaked out to sleep. I get up and ruffled through my top dresser drawer, took out a cigarette and matches I had hidden there, and motioned to Eleanor to get up as we tiptoed out the door. We peeked out to see my sister sitting there watching the door. We weren't going to leave that way. The only other way was to climb out the bedroom window and go back around to sneak a smoke. So that's exactly what we did. I took the Salem menthol cigarette, placed it to my lips and struck the match. And as I did so, I saw my little sister coming around the corner of the patio, closest to the back door. She just wanted to share the smoke, but when I said no, I was blackmailed into giving to her some because she was the baby girl, and Mum would believe whatever she wanted to make about me. So I passed it to Eleanor, and she passed it to Sylvia, who of course got hotboxed by it, taking too many drugs. I stomped it out, and thought we'd go back to my room to try to sleep. This is where things get a bit more weird. I thought we went back in the house via the front door where Sylvia came out. Deb, our big sister, wasn't in the hallway, so we got back in the room and our sleeping bags with no issues. However, I awoke just around dawn sleeping on the floor of the tool shed next to the freaking blue steamer trunk that had my name on it. Suddenly the shed door opens, and it's Eleanor and my little sister. They say something like, "You win hide-go-seek. We've been looking for you since last night after the smoke." I just laughed and went along with the idea that I'd hidden there on purpose, but I was perplexed. It's strange, but when you're a kid you can somehow let stuff you can't wrap around your head just go and proceed with whatever comes next, or maybe it was an aspect of the trunk to mask our thoughts about it. Such weirdness was a part of this time. I tell this short event to help express that many other strange and weird and even borderline outrageous things happened at the house. Not sure if it was just the trunk or the location that was the vortex of weirdness. But anyway, My brother graduated high school, joined the army and was sent off to Vietnam. Our parents started having even more issues than before and I was 12. Things were changing. I finally went into the shed and extracted the trunk. Nobody could tell me how it got there or why my name was on it, but I slowly opened it. It never had a lock on it, but for some reason I never thought to open it, nor had any other member of the family. Who doesn't open something like that? It had been there for nearly 3 years, yet with all of my questions about it, I'd never once as much peeked inside. Let me tell you, my sisters were always going through my stuff. Anyway, this part is a bit confusing. There was a picture of a girl called Yvonne Streeter, although my sisters said it was just her friend Debbie Streeter. A few years later, when incarcerated in juvenile hall, I met Yvonne Streeter. Yes, Debbie Streeter's little sister. Debbie and my sister Deb had been friends in school, and I had gotten that picture from Yvonne herself. There was also a picture of a cute chubby baby, a black nightgown, a glass water picture, clear with yellow flowers, and some things that proved to be the objects that would astonish and amaze me. One was a paperback script of the play The Wizard of Oz. It had the initials PJ on it. There was also a library book for the script of the musical The Music Man. The card in the front said the last person to check it out was me, and the return date was July 30th, 1975. Remember, I was 12, and this is 1969, when the trunk was first opened. How many years later, I know how this trunk came to be. It was bought for me by my 26-year-old boyfriend to help me pack up stuff while I ran away to live with him in Green River, Wyoming when I was 16. I was found, returned to California, and incarcerated in Contra Costa County Juvenile Hall, where they used the label maker to put my name on it. Okay, so that happens, but there's more. I was sent to foster care in Oakdale, California. My trunk was lost for a time, but eventually got sent to me in my new home. I buckled down and managed a B average on the last semester of my junior year, as well as throughout my senior year. It was quite fun there, and without my family dogging me, I did pretty well. Senior year, I had chosen to be Glenda the Good in my high school performance of The Wizard of Oz, and I had taken the nickname PJ, as my aunt, for whom I am named, had always called me Peggy, and my middle name is Jean. I later also participated in the high school musical The Music Man, though after graduation I went back to Martinez to live with my mother and stepfather. Not a great move, but it brings me to another object found in the trunk. The library book of the script of the aforementioned musical. The local summer stock was holding auditions for The Music Man. I'd already done this musical, and I thought I'd be sure to get a singing role. I went to our local library and checked out the book. I really didn't get the correlation at the time. Really, how could I have completely missed that? I just went forward, and did not give the trunk that I found as a young girl a single thought. So there was the picture of the cute baby. Now, years before, when I'd first opened it, my mum said that it looked like my baby brother, but it wasn't. This is who it was. And now I can write it down and deal with the weirdness. In 1977, 1 month before my 20th birthday, I gave birth to a 10-pound, 9.5-ounce baby boy. Me and my then husband named the baby Jason Adam Nichols. Oh, my goodness. He was the baby in the picture. Thus the family resemblance to my baby brother. I still don't know how or when the trunk travelled through my own timeline, but I was the one who packed it when I moved out of our house during the separation and eventual divorce from my now ex-husband. This is just some of the weird-ass stuff that happened to me. It is hard for me to even write this out and still perplexes me to this day, but I know that someday I will hopefully completely understand. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so very much for listening to tonight's stories. We really had some excellent stories today. Very happy with the quality. Truly exceptional. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's collection as much as I did. Really, really fun. If you did, be sure to let me know in the usual way. As you know, subscribing and bell iconing and all that kind of stuff is really good for the channel and really good for me. And it would certainly mean a hell of a lot if you could go ahead and do that. You know what's also really good that I just thought? Coming every time there's a new video, just, seeing the video and actually listening watching it. That's always very much appreciated. So thank you to everyone who tuned in today and stuck around till the end. It really means a lot. Thanks. If you'd like more spooky content, we have thousands of videos on the channel. We have a lot. So be sure to check out another one if you still have more cravings for stories. I would also like to extend a huge thank you to my members, patrons, and coffee supporters. Your support really does mean the world to me, so thank you so much. But with that being said, I think it's time to wrap things up here. Stay awesome, and I will see you in the next one.